Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Adina Kruskal, and this is my CAPS research presentation, which is entitled Deconstructing the Musical. And the reason for the parentheses there in the title is because the goals of my project were twofold. In the research portion of my project, which I wrote a research paper about, I tried to find out what makes contemporary musicals tick, what makes them work, what makes them successful. And then I used that to help work on my fieldwork aspect of my project, which was starting to write my own musical. And before I talk to you guys at all, I just want to do a little demo of my point. I'm going to play a song from a musical that I think you guys will know, and just raise your hand as soon as you recognize what show it's from. Oh, whoops. That is a spoiler alert, but technical difficulties get the best of us. Okay. Anyway, I'm sure you guys all probably recognize this song. Yeah, there we go. And so, do you guys recognize that as being from The Lion King? Yeah. Yes. And my point there was going to be that you recognize this. Why is this in full screen? There we go. My point there was going to be, as soon as I reset this, that you recognize the song after only hearing a couple seconds of it. That's a lot of power right there. That shows that The Lion King, it's so hugely successful. It's obviously commercially successful. It's been on Broadway for 15 years, but it's also so in everyone's mind that you only need 2 seconds of the opening song to know what you're listening to. And so that is kind of what sparked my interest. How can a new musical attain that level of success, or even not like The Lion King, even just a moderate level of success like that? What about the show will help it do that? And so in order to narrow my scope, instead of looking at all of musical theater from all of time, which would be an incredibly large scope, I just decided to look at musicals that have been on Broadway in the past 10 years. And so before I go on, I have to define what I mean by success, since that's a pretty broad term. Most people, when they look at success for musicals, they usually just look at commercial success, but I wanted to look at different types because that's not the only way for a show to be successful, to mean something. And so the first is obviously commercial success. How much money does a show earn? How many performances does it have before it closes? That's pretty straightforward, and like I said, a lot of other people have done research on that. The second is artistic success, which is a rather subjective thing, so it's hard to measure, but the way I chose to measure that was via a show's Tony Awards record, because the Tony Awards are nominated and voted on by a panel of professional theater producers, creators, actors, writers, directors, etc. And so they represent the opinions of kind of the theater elite on what a show's merit is. And finally, there's a third that's kind of the least tangible, which is cultural success. How popular and how meaningful is the show to the general public? And it's very difficult to quantify that, but in my research, the way I tried to do that was by using an online survey in which I asked people about their opinions on musicals, what they prefer in musicals, what makes them go see a musical, and a number of contemporary musicals I asked if people had seen them or heard of them, in order to kind of get a reading on how notorious those shows are. And so I discovered a lot of different things that contribute to show success, which I talked about in my research paper, but the number one most general and wide-reaching tip that helps with all 3 types of success is that a show needs to get attention. It needs to get a lot of attention, and it needs to get it early on in its Broadway run in order to be successful. Especially for commercial success, this is very important. There was a statistical paper written in 2000 that showed that one of the best predictors for how long a show was going to run on Broadway was the percentage of its tickets that it sold within the first 5 weeks. You know, if the show is completely sold out in the first few weeks, that's a very good predictor that it's going to run for a long time, whereas if it only sells 30% of its tickets for the first few nights, it's usually not a good sign. So yeah, a show needs to get attention. That's very critical. So ways that shows can do that are, first of all, straight up what we think of plain old marketing, posters, designing posters. These are posters from a show called Avenue Q, which came out in 2003, and it's sort of an adult satire of Sesame Street. And as you can see, these posters are really good at grabbing attention because they showcase the puppets, which are the main gimmick of this show that sets it apart from other shows. They have these puppets that are designed in the style of Sesame Street. And also these captions, I don't know if you can read them, they have captions like, "Warning, full puppet nudity." And they kind of grab the passerby's eye and get people not only reading the poster, but also thinking about what this show is going to offer them, which is a lot of, crude, fun humor. And so Avenue Q is a show that was very successful at marketing. They used it to get not only commercial success, but also Tony Awards. Avenue Q, they totally abandoned the Tony Awards are just artistic merit. They campaigned really hard to get people to vote for them in the Tonys. They made buttons, they sent CDs out to all the Tony voters of a new song that they recorded in which one of the characters from the show begged the judges to vote for them. And it worked. Avenue Q ended up winning Best Musical, Best Score, and Best Book, which are basically the three most important awards for a musical. And that's huge. So attention can also be used for artistic legacy, although I guess you could argue that corrupts it a little bit. Finally, there are things that can be outside of a show's control that can also work to their benefit. Take the example of Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. It's a musical based on the Spider-Man franchise, which is widely regarded as a gigantic train wreck. Critics panned it, it was awful, and among the show's problems of just being a bad show, they also had a lot of injuries of the main actor when he was, swinging on his fake wire webs trying to be Spider-Man. There were a lot of equipment malfunctions that led to the actor falling and getting severely injured on stage. And so while this seems like a really terrible thing on the surface, and it is because the guy got injured, it actually got a lot of press attention, which got a lot more people hearing about the show and got a lot of people to want to come see the show because it's like, oh, I want to know if the guy's going to fall on stage. That would be so cool to see that. So as terrible as it is, accidents like that can really work to a show's advantage because Spider-Man, even though it was a terrible show, it ran for over 1,000 performances, which is really respectable. Now that's kind of one of the most general meta tips, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about writing tips. When you're starting from scratch and creating a musical, what are things to keep in mind in order to try and make something that's going to be successful? So first of all, your story has to be something that can be musicalized, which means it has to be something where it doesn't feel weird if the characters start breaking out into song randomly, because that doesn't happen in normal life, at least not in most people's lives. So you have to justify it within the story so the audience doesn't get too distracted by the fact that the characters are just breaking out into song. The second rule that kind of logically follows from that is that the story should be musicalized. It has to be a story that is best told through the medium of musical theater. Otherwise, you're just kind of wasting everyone's time and money because musical theater is a hugely expensive and borderline impractical medium through which to tell a story. So it's got to be really worth it. You have to have a story that has emotional points at which the characters really can't express what they're saying through speaking. It has to be expressed through song. And that's kind of a subtle thing, and it's a debatable thing, and that's a criticism that a lot of musicals, especially ones that are adapted from movies, get because they feel like, audience people feel like, if it worked as a movie, why did you have to make it into a musical? And so that's a bit debatable, but when a story really belongs as a musical, it's very clear, and it's usually a great musical. Finally, the show needs a consistent mood. There are two main categories of moods that musical theater typically falls into, one being serious, the other being campy. And these are very, very different moods, and you don't want to mix them because then the audience will get confused as to whether they're supposed to be laughing or crying, and it will really take them out of the story. Just for an example, on the really serious side of the spectrum, you have Les Miserables. You have characters who are, starving, dying, old-timey France, and everyone's crying. And then on the seriously campy side, you have a show like The Book of Mormon, which is like a religious satire, and there's these dancing white boys in the middle of Uganda, and then the last line of the show is, "I have maggots in my scrotum." No one's gonna take that seriously. And as long as you're at either extreme, you're really okay. People enjoy both, but you don't wanna mix them. And so now to kind of exemplify these rules, I'm gonna go back to Avenue Q, because it's one of the most successful contemporary musicals, and I think it does a good job of following all these rules. First of all, can it be musicalized? Well, yeah, I mean, there's puppets on stage. That really helps justify the music because the puppets already require so much suspension of disbelief that people don't really doubt it if a puppet starts singing. Second rule, should it be musicalized? Absolutely, because as I said, it's kind of a spoof on Sesame Street, and if you've seen Sesame Street, you know they often break out into little songs about like teaching kids lessons about sharing and saying sorry and stuff like that. So instead in this show, they sing songs about the internet is for porn and everyone's a little bit racist. And it really works well. It accomplishes what it set out to do of being a spoof of Sesame Street and more, because it's also just enjoyable in and of itself. Finally, does it have a consistent mood? I think you can already guess from what I just said. This show is definitely on the campy side. It's completely ridiculous. I don't think any audience member would be questioning as to whether they should be taking this show seriously or not. So now zooming in a little bit, I want to talk about songs, because songs are obviously important to musicals. It's what sets them apart from other modes of storytelling. So your songs need to be thought about very carefully. Where you put them and what you say in them is very important to the show. So first of all, the songs have to be necessary to the plot. Otherwise, like I said, you're just kind of wasting people's times. Why use music to tell the story if you don't have to, you know? Stephen Sondheim, who is widely regarded as one of the greatest musical theater composers of all time, he says that if you can take a song out of the musical and it doesn't leave a hole, then it's not necessary and you should take it out. And another thing that Sondheim says is he advocates this model of a song being like a one-act play. He says that, you know, every line is like a monologue and every word is like a line. And I think that image is just very helpful because it shows how much meaning you have to pack into a song and how you need to really create an arc throughout a song in order to keep the audience interested, rather than just a like verse, chorus, this is just another song from the radio, you know? Something has to happen. The audience has to remain engaged. And so to demonstrate these rules, I'm going to show you a short clip from a song from Avenue Q. The lyrics to this excerpt are on the second page of your packets if you want to follow along. It takes place, oh my God. This takes place late in the second act. It's kind of the final, it's how the characters come to their final resolution. There's Princeton over here on the left. Yes, left, I know, right and left. And then Nicky is over here on the right, and Nicky is homeless at this point, and he's begging Princeton for money. And that's how this song starts out, so I'll just play you a short clip.
Okay, give me $1. That's not my bad. Give me $5. Are you kidding? The more you give, the more you get. That's being alive. All I'm asking you is to do what Jesus Christ would do. He gave me $1. Why don't you? All right, there you go. Oh, thanks. Take care. Whoa! What's the matter? I feel generous. I feel compassionate. And if you give me a 20, you'll feel even better. All this time I've been running around, thinking about me, and look where it's gotten me. Now, I'm gonna do something for somebody else. Me? No. Kate! I'm gonna raise the money to build that stupid monster school she's always talking about. Okay. Give me your money. I only for Kate. I need it.
All right, and as you can imagine, then Princeton turns Nicky's own song back on him and starts begging him for money. And then after that, Nicky finally gives him his $1 back, and then he goes, wow, now I feel generous. So I think this song does a really good job of showing that sort of one-act play sort of model, because it's broken up into those different scenes of Nicky's begging Princeton for money, and then Princeton gives it and feels generous. And then he has the revelation of, oh, I should be helping others more than myself. And then he flips it back on Nicky. Nicky comes to the same revelation. And then by the end of this song, actually the whole cast of characters comes out and starts singing about when you help others, you can't help helping yourself. And they go and beg for money from the audience at that point, which just shows how this show it's so ridiculous that it can even make fun of the traditional musical song arc, and it still works and it's still entertaining. So just now I'm going to segue a little bit into, now that I've discussed these rules, I'm going to talk about my own work, writing my own musical and how I've tried to apply these rules to my work. My musical, it's not finished yet. I've been working hard on it, but writing a musical is a big process. I've been working on both the score and the book. And I've been going from scratch. You know, it's often, a lot of people start with adaptations because it's easy to work from a story that's already there and then musicalize it. but I didn't want to deal with copyright law and all that. So I decided to go for original, it's hard, but it's also nice because you have a lot of freedom. My show that I've been working on, it's tentatively titled Off Day, and it's kind of an homage to Ferris Bueller's Day Off, in which two friends, which are loosely based off of one of my friends and myself, they decide to skip school for a day near the end of their senior year, and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna have a super fun, awesome day, just like in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. We're gonna get into so many shenanigans and it's gonna be great. But then they find out over the course of the day that it's kind of hard to force stuff like that. You can't just magically create a fun day of shenanigans, especially if you're not a crazy risk taker like Ferris Bueller. And then they come to some emotional revelations and all that crap at the end. So far, I've been working on it. I've got a good chunk of a draft so far, and I just want to show you guys one of the songs that I wrote so far. I got one of my vocalist friends to sing it for me on very short notice, and she was kind enough to help me out with that. The lyrics to this song are also on the last page of your packet if you want to follow along. Quick context, it's when Alex, who's one of the main characters, is trying to convince Jamie, her friend, that they should skip school. So it's kind of the spark for the whole rest of the plot. Thank you. And a big shout out to Elal Aniato for agreeing to do this like just a few days ago and learn the song right away and then just record it totally off the cuff. Yeah, total thank you to her for that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I feel like it's personally a pretty solid first draft of a song. I think it does a good job of capturing the mood I would want to create in this show, a kind of like, kids, kind of what I'm experiencing. I'm totally writing what I know right now, being a senior who's pretty much done with school and wanting to get out of here. And I wanted to go on the more campy side of the mood spectrum, as you could probably tell, trying to get the audience laughing. I'm pretty happy with this song now, as I said, but there's one more thing I have to keep in mind, which is probably the most important rule of musical theater writing, which is you always have to be ready to revise. Writing a musical is usually a years-long process, often when there's even a team of people writing it. And one thing I heard over and over from musical theater professionals is that you always have to seek feedback from audiences, from other writers, from actors, from everybody you can. And you need to take that feedback and reevaluate your show, see if it's really giving to the audience what you want it to give to them. And then you can't ever be afraid to take it back to the drawing board. You have to be ready to cut your favorite songs, to rearrange your favorite characters. Nothing is set in stone even after it opens on Broadway, You always have to change it if it's not working. And while that's kind of daunting, it's also a great opportunity because it also means that no matter how bad your first draft is, it can always turn into a great musical. And so even though I have a long journey ahead of me in trying to finish this musical, which I will continue after this project, I feel like what I've learned from my research and from my experience so far has helped me a lot. And I feel a little better prepared for continuing to write this show. And who knows, maybe in 10 years or so it could be premiering on Broadway. And if it is, then I will, of course, invite all of you to the premiere because thank you so much for listening to my rambling about my project. All right, thank you guys. Do you have any questions about my research or my project or what I had for breakfast or anything?
I do know for musicals what really makes a difference that maybe you didn't talk about. I mean, the words are important, the plot line, and the significance of the song, but the catchiness of the music itself, not the lyrics, but the music.
Yeah, that's very true. In fact, in the survey that I did online, I asked people about what factor of a musical was most important to their enjoyment, and by far the most popular answer was the quality of the music, as opposed to the quality of the story or the performances of the actors. And that's really telling. I think the quality of the music is very important to us, but it's also so hard to quantify what makes music good. I mean, that's a whole other can of worms that we were actually talking about in music theory class the other day. What makes music good? And I don't know exactly how to answer that, but I agree that it's very important. There's a reason that the Sondheims always win best score, and the random pop scores that come out of other shows, even if they might have the best story ever, they don't win.
Or even the lyrics aren't that great.
Yeah.
The music is good.
Yeah, really. Yeah?
So you said you looked at the most successful musicals in the last 10 years. I'm just curious what some of those were.
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of them depending on which kind of rubric you use. If you use the commercial success or the artistic success or the popularity. I mean, the popularity kind of follows along with commercial success, which I think is mainly because if a show runs for longer, more people hear about it and more people have the chance to see it because it's just on Broadway for longer. But as far as commercial success, there's Wicked, there's Book of Mormon. I mean, Lion King and Phantom are hugely successful, but they opened on Broadway before the scope of my project, so I didn't technically count them. Let's see, there's In the Heights, 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, Avenue Q, Spider-Man, Mary Poppins. There's a bunch that have been really successful commercially, and the ones that have been successful artistically is actually not a whole lot of overlap. The ones that have won the most Tony Awards are, I think Billy Elliot was the #1, closely followed by Book of Mormon. There was also The Light in the Piazza, Spelling Bee, Kinky Boots. So yeah, there's a whole lot of ones that I found that, Once was also up there. The ones that were more artistically successful, if they weren't also commercially successful, not a lot of people have heard of them, even though a lot of theater geeks probably know and love them, just they haven't gotten out to the general public as much, so, yeah.
So did you just compose the lyrics, or did you also compose the music for that?
Oh, I did all of it. That was completely from scratch. I mean, musically, I have to say, as a listener, I would not be very satisfied with that musically. Because I'm not that experienced with composition, I basically just threw down the most basic chord progression that I could based on my 1 year of AP music theory. That's the extent of my knowledge. So if I were to continue, while I continue working on this musical, I do plan on taking composition classes and whatnot in college, and I would try and make the music a little more complex, a little catchier, like we were talking about, because I think that's very important.
Aren't all great music
That's true of a lot of musicals nowadays, but not all. I mean, Stephen Sondheim, who, as I said, is one of the greatest composers of all time, he does music and lyrics. Stephen Schwartz as well. I mean, it's really just up to personal preference. I personally feel like it would be really hard to have a separate composer and lyricist because I feel like they're so intertwined that if I had to be consulting somebody else on every little change I wanted to make, it would just be so much harder. But that's me, personally.
Did you see
Yeah.
Witness Uganda by any chance?
What?
Did you see the musical Witness Uganda?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. It was at the ART, and it was recent, and it's about aid workers in Uganda,
Mhm.
and it was just interesting because of your conversation about if it can be made into a musical.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like one of those musicals that the subject matter, you can't believe that
Yeah.
it can actually be a musical. But
Yeah, and you know,
they did a
like,
good job of it.
yeah, that's a very fine line. And I think in the hands of the right writers, technically anything probably could become a musical, but it's true that it's much harder to take a serious subject matter like that and do it justice as a musical as opposed to something like Avenue Q, which very naturally lends itself to the medium.
Do you know the producers?
I've heard of it. I have not seen it. It's on my list of like millions of musicals to watch. Yeah,
Something about the Holocaust.
yeah,
Music.
yeah. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
What professionals did you seek out to get
Um,
advice from?
Well, there were some professionals that I didn't personally seek out, but I just read interviews with, like Stephen Sondheim, Julie Taymor, who was the director of the Broadway production of Lion King, won Best Director for that. I watched a TED Talk by her. Cameron McIntosh, who was the producer of a ton of successful musicals a little while ago, like Cats, Les Mis, all those mega musicals. Personally, though, I interviewed a currently working Broadway producer who's a friend of my mother's named Jack Thomas. He's worked on both plays and musicals, and he was kind enough to take some time out of his very busy schedule to interview with me and answer a lot of my questions about what it's like actually from the inside. Yeah?
Thinking of, so the Lion King, I'm just thinking of what makes the show successful.
Mm-hmm.
I love musicals, and one of my favorite movies is Newsies, and that became a musical.
Mhm.
So as part of the success of like Lion King and Newsies, is that just, the familiarity already of the audience and already loving it?
That's a big piece of it. That's something I took a lot of time to discuss in my research paper, but I unfortunately wasn't sure if I could cram into this. Yeah, that's really important because, as I mentioned, selling tickets very early on in the show's run is very, very important to its success. And so movie musicals on average sold, I calculated it out, it's about like 85% of tickets in their first 5 weeks, whereas original musicals on average only sold about 68%. That's a very significant difference, and it shows how much having that known property gets people to want to spend their money on it more than something that's completely unknown, which is kind of more of a risk, like, oh, it sounds cool, but will I like it? Whereas if you have The Lion King, it's like, oh, I've seen that movie and I liked it, so I'll go see it on stage. And it's kind of a double-edged sword because if people are already familiar with it, maybe they won't want to pay money to go see it. They won't want to pay $100 to go see something as a stage musical when they've already seen it as a movie. So it's a trade-off, definitely, but that's a very significant factor, and I think that's a little bit of the contribution to the trend of slightly more movie musicals in the past decade that some theater elites have been scoffing about and saying, oh, Broadway is dead, there's too many movie musicals and nothing creative anymore because it's not like it was in the 50s. But I disagree with that personally.
Have there been any unsuccessful movie musicals?
Oh, plenty, yeah. There's been just as many.
That comes to mind.
Honestly, none of them come to mind at the moment because, one does, but it's not from the past 10 years, Carrie the musical. That's famous as one of the worst flops in all of musical theater history because one of its biggest failures among being a strange choice to make into a musical was it did not have a consistent mood. It went back and forth from having super serious scenes of Carrie being like, I'm gonna murder you guys, and then of just random scenes with like her classmates singing like a Western song at a farm as they were picking out a pig that they were gonna use for the pig's blood to dump on her. So yeah, the audience had no idea what to make of it, couldn't connect with it, and it closed after, I want to say one performance, maybe a few performances. Total wreck. And yet they still tried to revive it, but it flopped again. Anything else?
Was there any one critic that you read that who's well known for writing?
Yeah, I read a lot of New York Times reviews of shows, and there were two main critics that I read several times, which were Ben Brantley and Charles Isherwood. I both found them to be heavily critical, pardon the pun. They, had some pretty harsh opinions of some shows that I personally enjoyed, but I guess that's their job to kind of highlight the strengths and weaknesses of shows, even if, the thing I had to keep in mind when I was reading reviews is that even though they are the opinion of an expert, they're still only one person's opinion. So they're not the be-all and end-all of success for a show. And, in a lot of cases, the other figures directly conflict that. Like Wicked got very mixed reviews when it first came out, and yet it's still on Broadway after 10 years, and it's one of the highest earning musicals ever. So, critics can whine about it all they want, but people enjoy it. So that's really that's the final say, in my opinion, if the people still keep buying tickets to it. Is that it? All right, thank you so much for coming.